good evening from Istanbul. I'm Pinar Elbasan, the General Coordinator of EURAS, Eurasian Universities Union. I'm glad to see all of you. Hey, Ivor also has come.
Morning.
Hi, Ivor. I think it's good morning to the States.
Yes, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Ivor. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's on a cold, rainy, chilly day in Berkeley, California.
It's it's very sunny here in Istanbul right now. It's very hot now. Spring has already come to Istanbul.
Well, I'm envious, but this is typical
you're
Berkeley.
In India. Great. So I don't want to take your time because you prepared an amazing presentation for our participants. So I just will give an opening remark, and then I will leave the floor to you. And personally, and on behalf of EURAS, I would like to thank you for accepting our proposal as becoming our guest speaker at our second EURAS webinar. Today, we also received many applications, many registrations for this webinar. And I'm glad to see our colleagues, friends from all around the world. This time we received from 19 different countries. I'm very happy to see the increasement for each webinar that we are organizing. And today we are pleased to organize our second EURAS webinar on Snapshot surveys, international office best practices during COVID-19. Our distinguished speaker, Dr. Ivor Emmanuel from UC Berkeley. He has served as the director of Berkeley International Office since 2003. And I hope you will introduce you more once you start your speech. And he also served in different international education associations. He is also an advisor board member of EURI, Eurasia Education Summit. And we are also happy to see Ivor every year at EURI Summit as also speaker at the EURI conference program. My colleagues from EURI teams are also here. Ayşe Deniz Özkan as well as İrem Arman are with us during the webinar. So hi also, they're at home I think. Right now I'm still in the office. Ivor, we also have universities not only from Turkey but from neighborhood countries, also from states, also from Asian countries are with us. So we would like to hear your experiences during these challenging times. And I also received many questions. So right after your speech, I will be also asking your questions. But since all of our participants are muted right now, so I appreciate if you write your questions through the Zoom chat part at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of your speech, I hope we have time to answer all our participants' questions, Ivor. So let me warmly welcome our participants. And thank you so much again, Ivor. I'm very happy to see you here again, this time virtually, but I hope when things return to normal, we would like to see you again in Istanbul. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. So once again, colleagues, good evening to you. I understand, if I'm doing my math correctly, that it's about time you would actually be wrapping up your work for the day. So I very much appreciate that you're taking additional time out to spend the next hour with me and your colleagues as we discuss our response to COVID-19. It's always a pleasure to be part of the EURAS community, and I am privileged to be invited to present to you, and I feel that it's a privilege, and I'm always willing to share my own experiences with my colleagues. As Irem indicated, I've had an extensive career in international education. I have worked at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign for many years, running the international office. I obtained my PhD from Illinois, and then subsequently I joined the University of California, Berkeley in 2003, where I've been serving as the director of the Berkeley International Office. So in fact, speaking of that, given my long career in international education, I've never really experienced something like this. I recall working through the SARS crisis. I remember working through our concern around Ebola, and I even worked through the crisis around 9/11 and the response that took place in the United States to those terrorist attacks. But nothing prepared us, I'm sure any of you, certainly me, for an event like this. Clearly, something that's unprecedented in our lives. Yeah, I think what was also more unique was the unprecedented manner in which we spiraled towards closure. And I would say this in spite of the fact that on January 16th, I sent a message to the director, the university head of our student health center, giving them a warning that this virus was beginning to spread in China and that we should be prepared because very soon we were going to see almost 3,000 Chinese students who had returned home for the holidays descending on our campus. I also witnessed in those early weeks what my colleagues and friends in China were experiencing as they sped towards rapid closure, towards lockdown, and the university shut in China. And I observed my colleagues having to transition to work from their homes. But in spite of it, perhaps we didn't think that this was going to hit our own back door. I honestly say I found myself not as prepared as I normally would have been. So things spiraled very quickly. Certainly there was little time to prepare as we knew in the end what was coming. And so yes, I would admit that I was kind of flat-footed and I wish I wasn't, but there you are. We had to respond in an agile way as soon as we knew what was happening. I would say that perhaps the first signal was on March 9th when the university decided to go and switch to remote instruction. At the time, the university chose to switch to remote instruction for just about a month. Soon after that decision, we were able to witness and see students descending on our office with the idea that they were going to return home and come back after the month to the campus. By the end of that week, the university then made another decision, and that was to extend remote instruction all the way until the end of the semester. Beginning on that date, which is the 13th, it was a Friday, we had about 350 students descend on our office within 3 or 4 hours. All of these students requiring visa travel signatures so that they could re-enter their country. By Monday, the Alameda County Health Officer declared a requirement where we were to shelter in place. That happened about 1 p.m. on the 16th. Within 2 or 3 hours, we had another 350 students descend on our office, all trying to get a travel signature before they tried to get out of the country as soon as possible. So we saw this come in very quickly, but in 3 different stages, which meant that obviously we had very little time to prepare. And I would add that I actually just returned from URI just a week before that. And after my return, I moved my office physically from one location to another, and there was no small feat to move 30 people to another office. So that's where my focus was at the moment, which is why I would say partly I was not as attuned to what was to foreshadow what was coming. So when it arrived, what did we have to do? I'm sure we've all had similar experiences and similar stories that we could share with each other. Certainly, in our case, we had to organize ourselves. In that preceding week, I did work with my IT team to get my staff ready so that they could work from home. So much so that on the first day when we were working from home, we actually conducted 222 individual advising sessions, as well as a group advising room with 75 people in that room, all through Zoom. It was our first experience using Zoom in this level and scope, but it's an indication of how rapid things change, how much there was a desire, a need on the part of our students for our services, because there were so many question marks. We also had to identify new tools to communicate. No longer could we walk down the hallway to talk to a colleague. And so we had to introduce the chat function out of Hangouts to be able to have an ease of communication with our colleagues. And more importantly for me as a leader, I had to hold the organizational culture together. I had to acknowledge how my staff, how everyone on my staff was feeling, because we were all fearful. This was something new, unprecedented, and unprecedented. And so I had to affirm those feelings and ensure that my staff were feeling understood and heard. I had to affirm with my staff what our values are and why we were doing what we were doing. What was the calling that made us join this profession? I had to emphasize our mission of the organization, what we were about as an office. And I also had to consciously express my appreciation for the work they were doing. And I had to do this time by a factor of 4, because my staff had started through this process of working with students. Remember, we saw 700 students in the last 2 days, in some situations putting ourselves at risk because we were not practicing social distancing at that time. So all of these rapid events took place in a very brief period of time. Nevertheless, we all settled into our new lives. It was then when I started to wonder about our students. Where were they? How were they doing? What were their plans? How many of them went home? How many of them remained? Will they return to the campus? And what else were on their minds? So yes, a lot of questions started to creep into my mind about the student experience. And it is then that I decided that I needed data. And so within a few days, I hastily developed a quick survey and had it mailed out to our entire international student population. So if you don't mind, I would like to just take a brief moment to share my screen with you. And I want to walk through the brief snap survey that we conducted. It's a very simple survey, something that any of you can do, but you'll be amazed at the wealth of information and data you can collect to help guide your work. So just give me a moment as I begin to share my screen. Okay, can you see the survey, COVID-19 Berkeley International Office Student Survey? Can somebody acknowledge that they can see the survey? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, Mr. Ivor.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So as I was beginning to say, I needed information, I needed data, because I wasn't feeling informed at all and was trying to position the office to find the best way to serve our students and support our students. You know, I was mindful of the fact that we have a very large international student population at Berkeley, and equally so a large freshman population. These are young kids who are 17 and 18 years old, away from their homelands, and without the support of their family, are struggling through a crisis that, as I said earlier, was unprecedented for any of us. And so I empathized with those students and was concerned about their welfare, and which is why we decided we needed some information to help guide our work. So we put this survey together. It was a very brief survey. We sent it out to all 6,500 international students who enrolled as of Thursday, April 9th. And as I stated earlier, we most importantly want to learn from the students, okay, where were they located, how they were feeling, and what were their future plans. And also what was on their mind. What did they want to share with us about what they were experiencing? Within 24 hours, we had a 20% response rate. And within 7 days, we had 25% response rate. So we just kept the survey open only for 7 days, and we received a total of 1,643 responses with 387 comments. And I would add that those comments helped inform extensively the real feelings that our students were experiencing just by the tone of those comments. So in terms of the response rate, if you take a look at this, literally across the range of all the levels that are represented on the campus by international students, this return rate was clearly representative of the overall population for all levels other than the seniors. The undergraduate students with the senior level, we had an enrollment of close to about 20%, but the return rate was, as you could see, 9.31. But outside of this group, each other group that responded was a reflection of the overall student population among international students. We asked them which country they were from, and the respondents pretty much reflected the top 5 countries that are represented among international students at UC Berkeley, and in that order as well. China with almost a 30% response rate, 13% from India, 6% from South Korea, Canada, and Taiwan. So those were the top 5 countries that responded to our survey. As I stated earlier, it was really important for us to know where were our students. How many of them left the country? How many of them remained in Berkeley? And so with that question, we learned that just over 27% of our students indicated that they had departed the United States and were currently in their home country. 1.7 said they departed, but they had left to a third country. And through the survey, we learned that there were almost 61% of students or respondents who were actually still in Berkeley, while another just over 9% of our students who had left the Berkeley area but were still in the United States. So together, between those who were in Berkeley and those who were in the United States, we knew then that at least about 71% or 70% of our respondents were still in the United States. But now it was also instructive to find out, well, among those students, how many of them were graduate students and how many of them were undergraduate students as to where they were located. So when we did another separate report by level, we learned that among graduate students who have remained, they were 88.5% of all graduate students, whereas among undergraduates, only 53% of the undergraduates were still in the US. In other words, from a proportional level, many more graduate students remained in the US than did undergraduate students. 88.5% of the graduate students and 53% of the undergraduate students remained in the US. I would speculate that graduate students obviously had more obligations because many of them were instructors and were doing research that perhaps gave them an obligation to remain in the United States. Some of our graduate students had families and they couldn't quickly uproot themselves and leave the country as quickly as undergraduate students could, which perhaps accounted for why more graduate students remained in the United States. We wanted to know from the students how they were feeling. And you will see from this chart that more or less 1 in 3 students indicating that they were doing fine. Nevertheless, there were a good 8.5% who said that they were feeling isolated. And this is something that many of ourselves were experiencing, so we were able to understand their feelings. Over 12% of them said that they were feeling anxious. Because again, as I stated earlier, so many of them are so young. This was an unprecedented event, nothing that any of us had gone through, and we didn't know what the future held for us. A few students indicated they were feeling depressed. But if you take a look at the next 2 graphs, these are typical Berkeley students. Over 20% said that they were concerned about their studies. That's where they were placing their emphasis. And almost an equal number were really concerned about their job prospects. It's spring. Many students were going to be graduating in May and had dreams about their new job, first job in the United States, and how they were going to build those careers. And perhaps the world had turned upside down on them. So this again was a very important slide for us to use as we prepared for the future. We are also interested in knowing how of the students who remained, how many of them were planning to actually graduate in the spring. This was going to be instructive to my staff in terms of how we prepared and how we prioritize our work within the organization so that we can accommodate the student needs, because as many students graduate, almost an equal number of them will require employment authorization so that they could engage in employment in the United States. That is a huge demand on our workload, and we needed to know how many students were around to plan accordingly. So again, my comments that I just made is tied to the fact that we were interested in learning exactly how many students were going to be pursuing what we call here in the United States optional practical training. This is the work authorization that students receive after they graduate, and they remain on their student visa but engage in employment. So this is the kind of data that we were looking for to guide our work. Another important question that was beginning to gain a lot of traction across the university, and I was getting calls from my colleagues inquiring about my professional perspective about the future plans of our students. So this was especially true from the Office of Planning and Analysis. This is the office that anticipates enrollment for each future semester to get a sense of what type of yield we need in terms from an admissions point of view, because this is all tied to tuition revenue. And as you would conclude, given the number of international students at UC Berkeley, we were drawing almost $280 million annually in non-resident tuition aid from our international students. So this was an important population for us to understand their enrollment plans for the fall. So looking at this graph, you'll see that almost 79% of the students indicated that they preferred to resume their classes and return to the campus, while about 12% indicated that they want to resume classes, but that they prefer to do it through remote instruction. So, about 2% said that they plan to defer their enrollment, and later on we found out that those were mostly our graduate students. Okay, and then you'll also see another close to, if I move my, give me a second. Yeah, so close to 6.5% indicated that there was some other reason why they couldn't answer that question as we had stated it. So digging a little bit deeper, my PowerPoint. Okay, so what were the reasons for choosing other? Most of the students actually turned out that they were graduating in the summer, so we were able to eliminate that group. Some students indicated that they couldn't decide until they knew what the university was choosing to do with regard to in-person versus remote instruction. And then several graduate students indicated that they had already advanced to candidacy. In other words, they were focused on research, and that their research will take place outside of Berkeley, and so they will register in absentia. So they were probably doing field research either in the home country or in the third country. Some students wanted to engage in a study abroad experience. We have many international students who come to Berkeley, but then engage in a study abroad experience to a third country. And a few students said it didn't matter to them, they had planned to remote anyway. We wanted to know from a university housing perspective, what were their plans? Because we recognize that in a residence hall, many students are living in close quarters. You know, we've used the term petri dish. In other words, there's a high concentration of students in a very small area, and that obviously posed a lot of risk in terms of the absence of social distancing. And so we were curious to know how students were going to choose where they would be living if they were to return. This was helpful to our housing office in understanding what the future student plans were in terms of where they chose to live. I also was acutely aware that, you know, if as many people in the United States lost their jobs as we did out here, this was an issue that was equally true for many families across the globe. So we wanted to know how this was impacting their family income by asking these students, you know, tell us about your own experience. And as you'll see from this graph, 26% of our respondents said they did not get impacted at all. Almost 42% a little. But if you look at the group that said somewhat significantly or very significantly, that's almost about 32% of our students who were affected either somewhat significantly or very significantly. That is 1 in 3 students. And so that was a significant factor for us to be aware of as we made our plans for the fall, and certainly as we as an international office could anticipate some of the financial problems that our students were experiencing. Just thought it would be helpful to also get a sense of the students' observations about how we as an institution were responding to the crisis. And as you could see, most of the respondents were in the middle. They were either somewhat pleased or pleased, with a somewhat larger percentage of respondents indicating that the university responded in a way that they were somewhat pleased, which was 44.63%. I also asked the same question in terms of how the international office was responding. And again, most of the respondents were in the middle, with a larger percentage indicating that they were actually more pleased than somewhat pleased in terms of how my office was handling the response. Again, this is, you know, encouraging information. It's something that's important to share with your staff, so that your staff can feel that, you know, the students recognize that we are doing our best under a very difficult situation. So we obviously ask students an open-ended question, which is just, you know, tell us, you know, what were they experiencing? What did they want us to know? And as I stated earlier, the tone of the comments appeared to reflect the anxiety that we're facing. And I would say this was the rich part of the survey that helped us to truly understand the student experience. So you'll see from this set of responses. We had over 380 comments from our students. Many of them were very concerned about their visa status, travel bans, were they able to return to the country? Many students left without getting their visa documents signed. Many students were completing their studies and were going to return home, but with the travel ban in place, were concerned about violating their immigration rules by not leaving on time. Some students were concerned about their ability to find jobs. So visa issues were chief among the concerns of our students. Many students commented about tuition and fees. Students indicated that they didn't feel that the absence of the student experience warranted them paying as much tuition and fees as if they were actually on the campus. And many students implored the university to either refund them the money for the spring and or consider reduced tuition in the fall if we were going to continue to engage in remote instruction. That's a question that and a discussion that continues to come up now, with more and more students continuing to comment about tuition levels for the fall semester. Again, many students were concerned with all the companies shut down, with everybody sheltering in space, the inability of students to identify that first job after they graduate. And for those students, they only have 90 days after graduation to either find a job or depart the country. And so many of our students were concerned about this rule. We also learned that many students were experiencing financial challenges, even to the point that students were experiencing basic food insecurity. Students were concerned about paying rent, especially the students who had not even planned to remain in the Berkeley area. They were now facing a situation where they have to pay rent when they had not expected to do so. And of course, many students, fearful of the unknown, were anxious to find out from the university, what is our decision? Where are we in terms of our planning? Are we going to engage in in-person instruction, or are we going to be continuing remote instruction? That is a decision the university still has not made. We plan to make a decision by mid-June, but we are communicating extensively with our international students, indicating that regardless of what decision we're going to be taking, we are definitely going to be offering remote instruction. So we wanted students to know that they had some option. Again, a few students commented about grading and online instruction. Clearly, students were concerned about the time difference and the challenges associated with the time difference. Some students commented that their home conditions had changed. Now they are with their families, perhaps in a very tight living situation, and it wasn't as easy for students to absorb the workload that the professors were providing them. And the students were concerned that they didn't see the expectations by the professors shifting at all. And then finally, a few of our students expressed their deep appreciation for the work we do. So what are the implications of this? I mentioned earlier, travel signatures, housing, those are all issues that were also of concern to our students, and so I won't spend more time on that. Perhaps I'll comment with regard to curricular practical training. Some of the issues that are facing our students right now for next year is that if they engage in remote instruction, the immigration regulations require for the students to have maintained a student visa status for 9 months to be able to engage in post-graduation employment or summer internships. And that's now a big challenge looking ahead. If our students engage in remote instruction, they will not fulfill that 9-month requirement and therefore will be ineligible for employment the following summer. This is something that is unaddressed. Homeland Security has not identified a solution. And I know that some of our professional degree programs are looking to extend their degree requirements into the following summer so that the students can meet those regulatory requirements. So what do we plan to do with all of this data? So one of the first things I did as soon as I analyzed all of this data was to send out an email message to all of our students responding to the many comments that were provided, including all the comments that were not analyzed for the purpose of this presentation. We sent them a detailed response indicating what we plan to do. And for example, recognizing that so many of our students were experiencing financial concerns, I work with my team, I'm working with the campus, and I've pulled together resources of about $300,000 that I'm now going to be using towards a student emergency fund for international students. We are presently evaluating over 200 applications that we call for students who are experiencing financial crises. So just since the survey, since an email message went out inviting students to apply for emergency funds, we've been able to put together about $300,000, and we're reviewing over 200 applications to help those students with basic food necessity needs as well as with rent. We organize webinars for our students, again, trying to respond to all the many questions that came up through the survey that we couldn't address in other ways. As I mentioned, we made an announcement about the financial aid. We then also organized many virtual events, workshops. We collaborated with the Student Counseling Center to offer workshops on how to cope with anxiety during these times of crisis. And then we've also finally shared this data with the graduate division. This is the division that works with our graduate students, the Office of Planning and Analysis, so that they could better inform their decision making around the fall, the Counseling Center, housing, and other campus units. Again, a lot of data to be shared with our colleagues. So that concludes my presentation. As I said, this is a very simple survey, but provides an opportunity to provide useful data to help guide our work. I see that we've got about 20 minutes left, so let me stop and perhaps now invite you to submit some questions or make comments, because this is, as I said earlier, something that is new for all of us, and we can all learn from each other. And thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you so much, Ivor, for the brief presentation of the survey that you provided the answers you got from your students. I'm sure you're doing your job great, but there are also universities who would like to hear your experiences, not the results that we hear from students. I have some questions, so while we are waiting the questions at the chat box, maybe I can start with my own questions that I received from our network.
If you're alluding to financial aid, I'm working with the Office of Student Financial Aid, and I'm working with other colleagues in what we call the Development Office. This is an office that engages in fundraising, and we have initiated a fundraising drive to assist our students, not only for those who are experiencing emergency needs now, but also for the fall in terms of how we can assist with tuition aid. So we've set a goal of raising, we actually set a goal of raising $1 million, but in fact, we had a benefactor who had donated $1 million and asked others to match her giving. And so I don't have the actual data right now, but we are well in excess of $1 million that we've raised to assist all of our students in the fall. Once this drive concludes, we'll have a better sense in terms of how much we can allocate to our international students and how much we'll be allocating to our domestic students in terms of providing them financial assistance. We're also working with the housing division to assist our students to remain in their rooms or in their apartments, given that they had not anticipated that they would be staying longer. So our students were concerned, for example, that they would have to, their lives would be disrupted because they have to leave because somebody else is had a hold on those leases. So we were working with the housing division to ensure that our students' lives are not disrupted and they will be able to remain in the residence halls or in their apartments. So that's another angle in which we are working with our campus partners. The university, in terms of its plans to reopen the university, has established several committees that are going to be focusing on different areas of how we ramp up instruction and research. And one of the committees is called Student Engagement and Services. And we haven't decided yet, either I or one of my staff members will be a member of this committee to help instruct our colleagues on how we together can prepare to deliver our services into the fall, whether it is again through virtual services or in person, based on the decisions we're making. I'm also consciously now invited to several of the emergency planning committees to provide them with updates on what we're experiencing, what services we're offering, and also sharing our data so that those committees can better conduct their own work. So again, a lot of things happening in different fronts. I've even authorized my staff exceptions to return to the office. So I have 2 staff members going back to their office, physical office, because we are anxious to get the visa documents to our international students who are new students who will be arriving in the fall. We are anxious to get those visa documents in their hands. So while we are able to do all of the work from our offices, but because of the volume, we are dealing with hundreds of visa documents. We've got staff going into the office and printing those documents out and putting them in FedEx envelopes to send them out to our students. That's an exception to the rule because fundamentally we have shelter in place and nobody's permitted on the campus. But for essential services, we're making exceptions from time to time. So those are the many different things that we're engaging in to support our students. I'm not so sure any of us have the silver bullet, but yes, I think we're all trying to do our best under difficult circumstances to anticipate what are the new patterns. Let me start off with the exchange students. So the exchange students we have enrolled at Berkeley, and that I think last fall we had about 355 exchange students. Those are all what we call reciprocity exchange students. These are students who come to Berkeley through our reciprocal exchange agreements. And so in other words, we send an equal number of Berkeley students to their campuses. Because of the travel ban and inability for international travel, for right now, we're pretty much anticipating that none of our students, our domestic students, are planning on traveling outside the United States in the fall. So with that, we're expecting that our exchange programs will be down to 0 for the next academic year. This is obviously the worst case scenario we're planning for because, again, so much of unknowns and the complexities around reciprocity that for the most part, it's a wash fundamentally for next year. Now, in terms of our freshman international students, again, as I said, between the data we've been able to provide and discern, and I would also add that the Office of Planning and Analysis also conducted a survey among all students, not just international students, and their data actually was not very different from ours in terms of understanding the number of students that we believe are anticipated returning to the campus next fall, and I would say either through remote instruction or physically, and we placed that figure at about roughly 89%. So accounting for the students we think we're going to lose, which is somewhere around about 5%, and then accounting for the freshmen who may be accepted but may decide not to return is the driving data that we're using to focus on yield. So what we're doing now in terms of Yield is we are increasing our messaging. We are sending out targeted messages from the Chancellor, communicating to the students that we value their presence on the campus because the diversity is so important to us, the type of contributions that they make to our campus, as well as the type of unique experience that they will get at Berkeley. So we're emphasizing the unique experience that undergrad students get at a place like Berkeley. And this is why we think it's important for them to stay with us and to engage in online instruction in the fall. And so again, the idea is by targeting specific messages to the international freshman population, we're hoping that we're going to capture their attention and have them stay with us. My staff and I are also preparing to do a online workshop. What we want to do is put together a panel of current students who can speak to the incoming freshman students, and to talk about the campus experience, the student experience, why Berkeley offers a unique experience, and why it is important for those freshman students to choose Berkeley and to decide to stick with us in the fall. And so, and as many of you may know, Berkeley is known for providing students a very unique experience, because we do emphasize student activism. We emphasize students engaging in interests outside of the classroom that improves the human experience, whether it's human rights, climate change. There's many other social issues that students are actively engaging as part of the student experience. And that's the message we want to convey to our students. As you know, this is an election year in the United States. Our government leaders perhaps have not done as great a job in managing the COVID-19 crisis in this country, and are looking for different ways in which they can speak to their base so that they hold on to their votes for the coming election. And so if they have not succeeded in the response to COVID-19, they're looking for other ways. And one other hot topic in which to appeal to the base is to focus on immigration. And I'm concerned that there's perhaps new executive orders that are on the horizon that may clamp down on the work authorizations that students engage in either in the summer or after they graduate. So my worry is that the government may be targeting the elimination of curricular practical training, the elimination of optional practical training on a temporary basis, so that, again, it appeals to the base. Again, those are the programs that they are targeting, but I would say on a temporary basis. The leadership at the university is focused first and foremost on safety. That is the guiding principle of their decision making about the fall. And that is why they have not made a decision as yet. When it comes to safety, they are focusing on ensuring that we have adequate measures in place to conduct testing, tracing, and isolation. When you have students in concentrated areas, whether it's a classroom, a research lab, in the dormitories, you are compromising social distancing. And so we need to have a proper plan in place to test, to trace, and to isolate. Once we feel that we have enough measures to do that effectively, and we also have enough PPEs, personal protective equipment, then we can make a decision as to whether we're going to have in-person instruction, a hybrid model. So I would say that is the fundamental guiding principle that's driving us. It's safety. The number one priority is the safety of our students and our staff. And I think this goes back to the my opening remarks. Interestingly enough, prior to us knowing that we're going to be sheltering in place, my team and I had long planned on a staff retreat, and the focus of that retreat was going to be on resilience and mindfulness. Unfortunately, we didn't conduct that retreat because we were already in shelter in place. So one of the topics that would have proved to be very useful for my staff unfortunately did not happen. Nevertheless, the campus has since offered virtual workshops and webinars on the topic of mindfulness and resilience. So we have a center on the campus called the Greater Good Society, and that unit focuses on topics of mindfulness. And so we've got the privilege and the resources right within this university to provide tools and approaches that campus staff can utilize to be more resilient. And as I stated, I, as a leader of my own organization, had to continuously remind our staff why we do what we do, talk to them about the passions that we bring to our work, and why it's important now more than ever before. I'm now much more than I've done in the past, reminding my staff of how much I appreciate the work that they're doing. Because let me add, in the international offices, our work has increased exponentially because so many of our students have so many new questions that there's a constant flow of online advising that's happening. Our workshops are generally at capacity. Our advising schedules on a daily basis are full with students with many, many questions. So yes, we're all going through our own personal challenges, and something, again, none of us were prepared for, but we're using the tools that are available to us at this moment. So, I would say that, look here, I think international education is never going to be the same, but this is not the end of international education. Rather, I would say that we need to press the reset button. I think we're going to learn new ways of how we engage with each other. And I think we're going to be all the better off because of this experience. So I'm speculating that in-person instruction in terms of international mobility is not going to end. Because, if you look back just a few years ago, everybody was talking about MOOCs and online instruction as the thing of the future. Well, that didn't quite happen, right? And so in a similar way, I don't think that we're going to suddenly go towards online instruction. I do believe that it has opened up opportunities. It has made us think about how we can harness technology to engage in an alternative form of instruction, how we deliver our education. But I don't think it's the end all. I think that we're going to learn from this experience. And I would say, though, to nuance my response, to say that perhaps the more prestigious and the more privileged universities and the ones that are better resourced are the ones who are going to survive better than others. I would say is that particularly true for the Research One University in the United States. I don't think that we're going to be impacted to such a level that you'll see vast changes in delivery of instruction. But clearly a reset button is going to be pressed. I heard of it. In fact, I saw a copy of that letter that they submitted to Homeland Security on the very day it was delivered. And on that very day, I was in touch with an office on my own campus. We have an office called Office of Federal Relations. This is staff that focus on advocacy at the federal level. And so what we are doing is harnessing our educational associations, the American Council on Education, American Association of Universities, to pull together the resources and write advocacy letters on behalf of their member institutions. So ACE has submitted letters, AAU have submitted letters, and individual institutions are submitting letters advocating for more opening, not less opening, and why it's so important to the university community, to the United States, to keep our borders open, to ensure that our international students not get closed off for these opportunities, because after all, so many of our international students who graduate from American universities go on to play instrumental roles in the tech industry and other areas, founding new companies and playing an important role in the economy of the United States. Not to say just the sheer amount of money that international students bring to the US and that contributes to the United States economy. And we know that other countries are competing for these same students. The United Kingdom in the last couple of years just reintroduced the opportunity for students to engage in post-graduation employment. Canada certainly has this as an option, other countries like Australia. And there's now also a shift in international education, and this is partly goes back to the earlier question, to what I would say is now called the regionalization of international education. I believe that students are going to be voting with their feet by staying closer to their homes, but not necessarily in the home countries. There are many new countries that are, I would say, newcomers to the field in terms of attracting international students. Singapore, for example, has an outstanding educational, higher education system, and they are going to be looking towards attracting international students from the region. So for us, the United States, we have to be aware of the competition that exists for those students. And that's part of the reset, that we're going to see a shift in international education, not an end, but a reset where there's going to be more regionalization of international education. So the key takeaway is that, look, this is something that none of us were prepared for. And it's a reminder that all of us need to always be thinking strategically, and even to individuals like myself, who has always focused heavily on strategic planning, that we have to think also for the worst case scenario and have that as your preparedness plan. Yes, we have strategic plans, but none that would have had a scenario of what we're experiencing right now, and how would we respond, not only in terms of enrollment, but also how you deal with the loss of your finances. At Berkeley, we switched to 100% online instruction for the summer. That was an automatic $400,000 loss of revenue to my office. So right now I'm dealing with at least $500,000 revenue loss, right? So we need to plan for the most extreme of circumstances to ensure continuity of your functions. Ensure that your strategic planning has components for dealing with a crisis that's of a pandemic level. We think about epidemics, we plan for them, but really none of us was planned or prepared for a pandemic that was hit. And so we need to think about this, and we need to think about what's the alternative when suddenly all your revenue or much of your revenue is gone. How do you plan for an alternative? Again, strategic planning is something that I've always emphasized, and I will continue to emphasize that the strongest leaders that are going to come out of this are those who are thinking strategically. As I think, as I stated earlier, I cannot state enough the importance of understanding that we need to think about how you cultivate and strengthen your organizational culture. Okay, as leaders, we all build our office cultures, but now suddenly when we find ourselves in a work environment very different, how do you sustain that organizational culture? How do you keep that team together, right? And so partly is reminding them of what your values, your passion, your mission, right? And then also think about how you are communicating now. You can't walk down the hallway now and see each other. And so find new tools to engage in quick forms of interaction, not by email and not by Zoom, because I think we're all tired of too many Zoom meetings, but we are using Hangouts, right? The chat function, it's a Google chat function. We use Hangouts and we quickly are messaging each other. That's one way. Another is to have, you could have a virtual office hours. Right? And so you could tell your staff on Thursdays, I'm available all day for a virtual meeting. And so anytime somebody wants to meet with me, that's your open hours. Another very simple idea is to organize a virtual happy hour. So last Friday morning, I decided when we knew we're going to be sheltering in place for yet another month, I quickly asked my IT team to set up a Zoom virtual happy hour for 4 o'clock on Friday. And I asked my staff to bring their favorite drinks and snacks. And we all got onto Zoom and we were able to see each other after several weeks as a total team. We shared our stories together. We shared what we were consuming with each other and had a lovely 1 hour. And I think that was a moment of re-energizing the team. So those are the very basic tools and efforts you could take to keep that team together. And as I said, as a leader, constantly remind your staff of how much you appreciate what they're doing for our clients. Look, honestly, I'm not so sure I've got an answer for this question. I think that right now, most of the partnerships are on hold. There's so much of unknowns between our lack of clarity around our ability to test, to trace, and to isolate. Again, safety is the #1 priority. Until we get such a program in place that's effective and successful, we have to be responsible in how we open up our doors and how we start resuming our partnerships and our exchange programs, because we have to focus first and foremost on the health and the safety of our students and our partners. So I think that really it's a little premature right now to be focused too much on our partnerships. You know, there's other unique aspects to this conversation as well. The reality is that the United States has many travel bans still in place. Our embassies and consulates are closed. We have no idea when the embassies and consulates are going to open. We have no idea when these travel bans are going to be lifted. So while we can prepare all we can, and unless those changes happen to opening the doors and our borders and our embassies, it's very hard for us to know how things will look like, even in August. Because even if the embassies were to open, individuals will have to apply for visas, they need appointments. How long are the backlogs as everybody rushes to get an appointment for a visa interview? And then if they do get a visa, have the travel bans for those countries been lifted? There's so many unknowns that I think that it may be a little futile to be going too down the path to think about how the partnerships are going to look like just yet. I think, as I stated earlier, this pandemic has presented new opportunities for us. For example, we all know that there are many teams all over the world rushing to create a vaccine. Similarly, there are many teams at Berkeley rushing to find different methods for fast and efficient testing. Berkeley, as privileged as we are, has a huge pool of researchers in epidemiology and similar areas where they are focusing on safe and effective ways to engage in testing. Some researchers are also contributing to research efforts towards developing a vaccine. I think these are great opportunities that we can share with our partner institutions. It opens up a new range of opportunities about how we're sharing our discoveries, how we can work together collaboratively to come up with joint discoveries. Again, I think this has opened up new opportunities for how we can engage with each other through new research efforts, new partnerships. You know, we all know Oxford University, for example, is right now one of the leading universities in coming up with a vaccine. But there are also many efforts in the United States of teams rushing towards finding solutions to deal with this pandemic. If you just use those examples, we can think about many creative ways in which we can start partnering with institutions across the globe towards new initiatives and efforts. So I would say use this opportunity to think out of the box about how we can collaborate across borders through partnerships that come up with joint solutions that serves humanity. Let me point you to the University of Arizona. I would encourage you to go take a look at what the University of Arizona is doing. They've come up with an amazingly innovative model. So they have established partnerships with universities across the globe, including with Ivor University, as a matter of fact. And so they've created all these partnerships around the globe. And what they are now doing is they're even inviting other American universities to partner with them, so that a university, if, for example, if Berkeley collaborated with the University of Arizona, we can have a Berkeley student enroll at Ivor University, get a Berkeley degree, pay the tuition level that Berkeley assesses, but all through an integrated collaborative partnership between Arizona and all of its global partners. A very creative, very innovative program that now addresses on the short term students' concerns about travel. They can literally stay in the home country and get a degree from another university, or travel to a regional country and get a degree from the United States. Very unique model, and I think if you look at that as a model, you can see other opportunities of how you can partner with other institutions to recruit and maintain your enrollment levels. I think that's one probably very good example that I can direct you towards. Look, I think based on where we all sit, there's a different context. For the United States, for example, we were already having to address concerns around safety. That was, if you look at surveys in China, the concern of the parents of Chinese students, the number one concern about why they're hesitant to send their children to the United States is around safety issues. So that was already something that was on our radar. So I think likewise, perhaps for partner universities in other countries or in Turkey, they need to think about your local context and what are the conditions around your local context, and then how do you use that to communicate with your potential recruits? How do you speak to the parents of those recruits? And so likewise for us, we are beginning to address issues of how we are dealing with safety measures on our own campuses. So I think we have to look at that from a local context point of view to think about what are the marketing messages and tools that we can use. So context, I think, is very important. If we are talking about mobility programs as it relates to partnership programs, I would say that for all practical purposes, we are putting that on hold. Again, largely because it isn't only the decisions around what we as an institution can make, but it's also what decisions our government is making that either it can facilitate or be a barrier to ensuring that those mobility programs can proceed. So, and so again, if I'm understanding the question correctly, if we're talking about mobility programs as relates to partnerships, but in terms of overall enrollment of students who are coming at an individual level, we are still trying to focus our enrollment targets based on our local formulas that we use in terms of the ratio between international non-resident, domestic non-resident, meaning American students who are outside the state of California, and then California students. We use all of these different target populations to understand what is our yield for the coming year.
Okay, thank you. Ivor, we don't have any more questions.
Okay.
I would like to thank you for having with us, sharing your experiences and knowledge. If you would like to say something to our network, our participants, please, it's your turn.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a privilege to engage with you this morning. I've learned what you're experiencing through your questions, and I appreciate the questions. I appreciate your own passion and commitment to this field, because you're all making this a long day for yourself. And I think the best thing I could say is that, look here, more than ever before, I am committed to international collaborations and partnerships, and ensuring that we together as a global society can work towards solutions that makes the quality of life better for those of us or the generations to follow. And so I think, as I said, we can make the best out of this pandemic and look at how we can make our future generations, how can we make their quality of life better for them? How can we leave this planet knowing that the footprints, the carbon footprints, have improved for the future generations? So think about the impact this has made on the way we think about our lives and how we affect this planet, and how we can leave it for the future generations. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ivor. I would like to also say some information about our upcoming events. Firstly, I warmly thank to our distinguished speaker from UC Berkeley, Ivor, a very close friend of our university, and our advisor board member. I would like to thank also personally and on behalf of EURAS. Thank you again for accepting our proposal, having with us. And as he also allowed us, we will be sharing this presentation together with the webinar recording with our participants. We will be also sharing this record on our YouTube account, and I will be also sharing with the link with you, Ivor, if you would like to share with your colleagues and with your network. And I'm also happy to also be present here to exchange views and share our experiences. And I also shared a link on chat box. We also launched a survey. Thank you to you. We also it was also an opportunity for us because discussions should be continued. So we launched a survey for our network. So feel free to, while we are waiting, we will be leaving this chat box 5 more minutes open. So feel free to complete the survey. It shouldn't take more than 2 minutes. And our next webinar will be held on 21st of May. We will be hosting another distinguished speaker from States again, Dr. Osman Özturgut from California State University, Channel Island, who is the Dean of Extended University and Associate Vice President for International Programs. And our webinar will be held on higher education post-COVID-19. So Ivor, you're also more than welcome to also attend next time as a listener, participant. And if you would like to share your your positive message with our participants. Of course, we will continue washing our hands, wearing our masks. I think we need to get used to with the new norms, and I hope we will be returning to our normal life in the very near future. But I think we have to get used to live with these new norms. So if you would like to also give a positive message to our participants, would be very much appreciated, Ivor.
Well, as I said earlier, I just want to reaffirm that we should do our best to take away what we've learned through this experience and think about how we can then better position ourselves, position society to offer new opportunities to the coming generations. So let's look to the ways of what we've learned from this experience. And certainly at an individual level, let's continue to exhibit the resilience and patience that's needed for us to really, truly put this awful disease behind us. I am personally concerned about opening up our businesses and our operations too quickly. That will end up creating a second wave of COVID-19 cases, and that's the last thing we want to do. So let's show more resilience. Let's put this behind us in a proper way. So maintain those social distancing as best as you can. Thank you again for joining.